And that jarring cacophony tells you you're back with the Power of Three podcast. Except you aren't, because I've been super busy. This is just a re-edit of this week's Piece of the Faith, but to bring it to a wider audience for people who aren't just solely interested in Paul McGann. I'm Kenny Smith.
I'm Matt Michael, and I don't know why I'm doing a weird voice.
I thought you were doing a sort of Yorkshire Jodie Whittaker kind of voice thing.
I wasn't.
Oh.
I was trying to do a Alexi Sale DJ type voice, but
yeah.
lacked conviction. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, that's because you weren't a 90s music dance kid like me, Matt.
Yeah, no. I mean, I like pulp.
Okay, I was going a little bit more Scooter and things like that, so my German hardcore dance and the likes. But anyway, this is not the Scooter podcast. If you haven't heard his version of the Logical Song, go and put it on and just laugh because it's awful. But anyway, that doesn't matter. We're here to go through the Eighth Doctor's adventures, whether on screen, in books, novellas, full cast audios, short stories, comics, animations, talking books, and everything and anything else we can lay our eyes, ears, and hands upon.
Those?
Yes, the Doctor Who Scratch and Sniff book, coming soon from Big Finish Productions. No, that's something else entirely. So Matt, today we are continuing our super excited countdown to the 4K and Blu-ray release of the TV movie. And we're going to be speaking very shortly with the man who's made it all happen, Mr. Paul Vanezis. So, Matt, are you a fan of extreme technical detail?
I am a fan of extreme technical detail. I used to avidly read Doctor Who magazine articles about recolorizing John Pertwee episodes and the differences between 625 line videotape, 525 line NTSC videotape, etc.
Yeah, and how they converted them or tried to reverse
conversion.
Yeah, good old RSC, cannot beat that. And I'm not talking about the Royal Shakespeare Company. It's funny, I hear RSC and I think reverse standards conversion is my first thought.
Yeah.
That's how you know you're a Doctor Who fan.
The Claws of Axos 1 and 4. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. And Sea Devils 1, 2 and 3 as well.
Yeah.
What has Doctor Who done to our brains? But yes, I used to love the restoration team updates and things like that. And now, very lucky, because over on the Power of Three, we regularly get the people involved in the restorations for the Blu-rays coming on, talking about how they've done their work. People like Peter Crocker going into incredible detail, but making it sound so easy about how they do the restorations. So we're going to speak to Paul Vanezis, who has some incredibly intense detail about how these things all work, because Matt, you and I are of a mind this way because we love this stuff, and hopefully everybody else will, and be able to follow it, because if you don't get it, skip back 30 seconds and you will get it, because I followed it, and this conversation was held late at night, but I followed it entirely, and it's brilliant because we're going to find out exactly how it all came about, how long it took to do the negotiations, and then the technical detail of the actual restoration and all the incredible things that Paul and the team had to do.
Clever man makes shiny picture. That's the Leela explanation for you.
Exactly. But it's just what we're going to hear. In fact, do you know what? I'll shut up and let's hear Paul talk, and then we can discuss further.
My name is Paul Vanezis, and I am a producer-director, a freelance producer-director, and I'm currently working on Blake 7 Series 3, but today we're talking about the Doctor Who TV movie.
I think it'd be fair to say that, given that we had the previous Blu-ray release, nobody saw this one coming.
Yeah, you're probably right about that. I know it's been discussed about the possibility of the film, and there were rumours that the film had been destroyed, and that I think on Wikipedia, or certainly on one of the articles I read about online, it said that Universal only held the film trims, which, considering the film was never edited, I guess is true. It's just all the rushes of the trims, kind of thing. So Yeah, I guess it is. It has come completely out of the blue, but it is something that we had been discussed by Russell Minton. He'd spoken to me about the Doctor Who TV movie and what the possibilities were, and I'd said to him, we can definitely make improvements to the existing master, but we're fundamentally limited. I mean, it's comparing the master that we've got now to the film rushes. So this is the 1996 conversion master. When you compare them side by side, it's actually quite poor, really. And the Universal copy that they sent us, which is a copy of one of their distribution tapes, is worse. So they're all not great. And so an upgrade is something that I said to Russell, that would be the ideal scenario. If they've still got the film, we go back to the film. And then his instant question was, because Russell's a really clever guy, and he thinks like a producer because he's a producer. What do we do about the effects, which are not on film? They're all standard definition, and in fact poorer quality, technically, than PAL video, standard definition PAL. You know, they're 525 and we're 625. We didn't really have an answer for that other than to just upscale what's there. And that was a discussion that we had about 5 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it has been talked about a lot during that period of time. So Russell went off and investigated and didn't really get anywhere. And then the production manager for the Doctor Who Collection project, Fiona Ball, had a contact at Universal that used to work for the BBC, and spoke to them and said, can you hook us up with the right person? And she did, and that was 2.5 years ago. And it's just been a negotiation really since then. I mean, initially it was just establishing what they had, which was basically the entire project, all the assets went into storage. And a lot of it went into I call it back storage. But I think the challenge for them was to track it all down and work out where it all was. So the EDL discs were in one place, so they sent us copies of some of those to check that we could load them, which we could. The film was in a separate store. The tapes were split in 2 different places, and the audio tapes, they were all over the place. The splits for the soundtrack, so all of the tracks before the final mix, they were all on 2-inch tapes, and there was a master and a safety copy of those. And the safety copy, it's called a geographical safety master, and the whole point of it is that they are never in the same place, so that if anything happens to one, you always have the other. So there was the geographical safety master of the audio splits and the master audio splits, which is what we wanted to use to do the Atmos track. And then there was a box of all the rushes, 5 boxes of all of the sound rushes, which were done on 1/4-inch centre track timecode Nagra tapes. And then there were DAT copies of some of those. I think Mark came to a conclusion that they were DAT digital copies of the rushes tapes of the sequences that they had actually been used in the programme. So they basically only transferred selected takes, and they did the same with the pictures. So they never actually transferred all of the takes that they'd shot for the edit. They used Jeffrey Sachs's selected takes to do that. So yeah, so then it was just a case of, okay, Russell went away and had a negotiation with Universal, and that took quite a long time. But then things moved very quickly at the end of the summer last year, and things started to arrive in October. And we literally started the scanning less than a week after the films arrived.
That must have been a real sort of delight to think, okay, it's really here, when you get that tangible box coming through with all the film.
Yes, that's true. I mean, I went down with Russell and Pete McTighe to Perivale. So the BBC Archive have been a fabulous partner in this. Universal were quite wary about sending all of that content out of the United States. It's something that you don't really do very often. And one of the projects I've worked on in the last year or so is Monty Python's Life of Brian, and again, is another project that has been kind of in the works for about 5 years or more. And Sony have got the distribution rights for that at the moment, and they had requested the negative of Life of Brian. And I advised the Pythons that really was not a sensible thing to do. Why move your master negative? Because they wanted all of the masters, the negative, the internegative, the interpositive, a graded print, all the sound elements, sent to New York for processing. And my view was that, why send your master material when you could scan it in the UK? I thought that was a sensible thing to do. And Monty Python, the negative is in 11 cans. With the Doctor Who TV movie, we had 219. So it's quite a lot of material. It's, I don't know what the footage is for a 90-minute feature film, Life of Brian, but it's not the 200,000 feet that we had for Doctor Who. So it was actually quite insane to even attempt it, which, considering the good result we've got from it, I think it does justify what we've done. But nevertheless, it was still a bit absolutely insane to even attempt it, I think. Actually, we planned it really carefully, and everything pretty much went to plan. The only thing that was slightly challenging was the sound didn't arrive with the pictures as we expected, and it actually didn't arrive until February, I think. So I think when we did the trailer, Mark was still mixing the sound.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, it was. And actually, there are lots of different mixes. He had to do a remastered version of the original stereo soundtrack, which is not a surround track; it's a true stereo mix for US TV, and that's the sound that we know, and that's what we've used ever since. He then had to do a 5.1 at Dolby Atmos, so that's 3 soundtracks, and in addition to that, there's going to be a screening at the BFI, and because they don't have the capability of doing an Atmos replay in NFT1, although it will be in 4K, he's done a down mix from the Atmos for a 7.1 for that screening. Yeah, so it's going to sound pretty good in 7.1. They can do 7.1 in NFT1, they can't do Atmos. Yeah, it'll sound good anyway. So yeah, he's had his work cut out. So yeah, so it has been a challenge to do it in the time, but I think we've done a pretty good job of it. I think it looks lovely.
You were quite hands-on with the scanning because you were spending a lot of time with Dave when he was going through them.
Yeah, so the deal that we had with Universal is that I would supervise. It had to be supervised by a named person because of their content, and that ended up being me. But also, I was trained on film. I used to be a film assistant at the BBC. So when I first started, I was a trainee assistant film editor, and in those days you mostly did syncing up, which is the rushes would come in and you would be given the tracks from the sound transfer. So the sound would be recorded on, like the TV movie, recorded on 1/4-inch audio tape and then transferred to, in the case of Howard's Way, for example, which I did a few days on, and a documentary called The Silent Revolution. That was all on 16mm, so you'd get the 16mm film rushes, which had been shot the day before, and then the audio would be transferred that day, and you would then have to sync up the two to make sync rolls, and then you'd have copy mags made, and everything would be rubber numbered, and then that would be ready to go into the edit suite. And the last film editing job that I did as an assistant film editor and a dubbing editor was the animated version of Under Milk Wood, which was in the end of 1991, went out in Easter 92, which was on 35mm. That got me used to handling 35mm film, and of course I've done a lot of work with 35 since then on features and various things. And the other thing about the project is I knew that I was going to have to conform the project. I think at one point actually Pete McTighe fancied doing it, but when I started looking at the project and trying to unpick it, it really needed someone that was had a lot more technical knowledge about film and also about an NTSC workflow. And it took me, I've never worked in NTSC before, and it took me quite a lot of head scratching to really work out how they'd made this show. I mean, it really wasn't straightforward. And it's all to do with frame rates. You know, they shot it at 24 frames and they telecined the film rushes to digital videotape, digibeta. And I knew that the film would be running at 24 frames but being recorded at 30 frames, or 29.97 actually, in truth. And to get from 24 to 29.97, that film is still running at 24 frames a second. It's the telecine machine that, if you like, spreads out that 24 frames using video fields. It basically stretches it out over the 1 second of time that the film needs to stretch to. So although the film's still running at 24 frames, and therefore the sound is running at that speed, the pictures are being laid down onto digital videotape, padded by repeats of those frames from the film in fields, in half frames. And there's a pattern to it, and it's called 3-2 pull down. So the film was transferred at 24 frames to digital tape at 30 frames, or 29.97, but it was still running at the film speed of 24 frames. So that made sense to me, and that meant that when Universal sent the edit master over, which is not the final version of the film, it's basically what they used to grade from. So it did have all the effects added, but it hadn't been graded exactly the same as the final version. But it was a good starting point for a reference to where everything needed to be. That, of course, was at 29.97, but I was keen to use that because that was the earliest tape in the path of how this pattern of 3-2 pull down had been added to each shot. So that had to be converted to 24 frames. So I have a scaler that does that, and if it's set up in the right mode, you can play the digibeta tape in NTSC. So I have a multi-standard machine here. You can play PAL or NTSC or whatever. And as long as the scaler is set up in film mode and your output is set to 24 frames, it will detect the input 29.97. Because the scaler is in film mode, it will say, right, I know this has 3-2 pull down. I know your output is 24. I'll get rid of the 3-2 pull down and just give you the original 24. So I was able to do that, capture that version of the TV movie and remove the 3-2 pull down to give me the original 24 frames back, which I then recorded, and it also upscaled it to HD, which is just sensible to work with square pixels instead of non-square pixels. And then, so that was basically became our template to match everything to. So I then took my system with that version of the film on down to Dave's down in Crowborough. He has a very nice Blackmagic G2 scanner, which can do it's got all the HDR plates, so you can do all the high dynamic range scanning that we need to do for HDR grading. And as he scanned the film, I created a log, and each slate that he scanned would go into my log. I had a log sheet, and while he was scanning it, I would also find that particular shot in the film, put a marker on it which identifies what the shot is, which slate it is, and which roll it's on. So not the take, but what roll it's on and what slate number it is. Because some slates there were 13 takes. I didn't want to get into takes at that stage, and helpfully in each film can the camera assistant had written down, had circled Jeffrey Sachs's favoured takes for each slate. So that was going to be where I would look. So I photographed all of those, and in my log I then highlighted each of the takes in my log, the ones that were circled, and highlighted those green. So rather than having to wade through all the photographs again and look for the circled takes, I could just look at the highlighted takes in my log and work from that. And so that meant that by the end of the 3 weeks, because we spent 3 weeks, and they were full weeks as well, pretty much every day, scanning the film. And we effectively had to also scan the film twice. So we actually scanned 400,000 feet of film and not 200,000, because we needed to do 2 passes for the HDR. By the end of that, I had an almost complete timeline with all the markers in, telling me where all the shots were. There were a few that we missed, which were difficult to find, and there were some where the editor had used like flash frames from the rushes, and they were very tricky to find. I mean, I knew they'd be on the beginning or ends of rolls, but as to where they might be, and a lot of them I just came across them by accident, and happy accident. But the other problem that I hadn't anticipated is that the original program was shot at 24, but it was edited at 30 frames. So even though we were trying to remake the film at 24 frames, the editor wasn't editing at 24 frames, he was editing at 30 frames. So if he put a couple of flash frames in, by the very definition of how we were unpicking it, converting from 30 to 24, we might lose some of those frames, some of those flash frames that he was putting in. And the other issue was that this pattern, this 3-2 pull-down pattern, it is a pattern that the scaler needs to be able to detect, and it needs to be able to detect it in real time. So it only really knows where the pattern starts or finishes once it's going through the scaler. So that was really challenging because it meant that the master, the 24 frame master I have, is good, but it's not perfect. So sometimes the start of the shot, the scaler would think it was in one cadence because of what the previous shot was, but then partway through the shot it would realise and change cadences to compensate for where the shot actually should be. And so you couldn't look at the beginning, the first frame, and because everything had to be matched by eye, even though we had an EDL, it didn't refer to the copies of the scans that we got, because they, first of all, they didn't scan every single take. They only scanned the takes that were circled, and so the time code. Then they were transferred to tape, and we didn't have the tapes that had those rushes, the scans, transfers on. We only had the film. We were scanning all of it because we didn't know what had or hadn't been used. So if you're eye matching and you're looking at the first frame, you might eye match to get that right for the first frame of each shot that you were matching to for whatever take it was. But then when you checked it halfway through the shot, it might be 1 or 2 frames out, sometimes 3 frames out, because by that stage the scaler has realised where the cadence was of the original pull-down shot, and it's worked out what frames it's removed. It says, oh, actually, I need to be removing these frames, not the other frames. And so the cadence changes sometimes mid-shot. So where do you make your reference point within that shot for where it needs to be? Because it's important to make sure the sound is in sync with it all. So there was a lot of cross-checking that and working out, are the cut points all in the right place? Some were and some weren't. And are we missing any of those flash frames? To be honest with you, even now, I'm not convinced that we've actually captured everything as it should be. I mean, I've checked those sequences 2 or 3 times. So, for example, the BBC's depth conversion, that, first of all, back in whatever year it was done, 96. To make that work, that has to go through a depth converter Snell Wilcox made. So the idea of the depth converter is that rather than do a motion estimated conversion, which always looks very poor, and I think the early Star Trek The Next Generation episodes that the BBC showed were motion estimated conversions, rather than do that, to get better quality, what you really want is to go back to the original 24 frames. So back in 1996, myself and Steve Roberts advised Sue Kerr, who was importing the film, the TV movie film for BBC Worldwide. We advised them to ask for a depth conversion because it would look better for a BBC transmission than this motion estimated standards conversion. We wanted it to look like a movie on BBC One, and that was a good move because broadly it looked quite good. It didn't get a lot of the motion artifacts that you would expect from a poor quality motion estimated conversion, but actually the depth conversion is what we used in combination with the BBC's, with the Universal Master, is what we use for the grading reference for this version of the film. Even though the depth conversion has not transcoded the colour quite as we expected it to look. based on what we've seen from the rushes. But that depth conversion also went through a 23.98 stage. So it's played at 29.97 off the digibeat. It goes into the converter. The converter says, to make this work, I really need this to be 23.98 rather than 24. So it does get rid of the 3-2 pull down, but then treats it as 23.98 and then plays it. And it has to do that because it needs to be able to play it out to a digibeater machine that's a modified digibeater that records at 23.98 but at 625 out from the output of it's because it's scaled to 625, and then when you play it back on a PAL machine it will play back at 25 frames. So that process, when I examined it here, had also added lots of artifacts and had lost some of those flash frames as well. So the only true version of the film is the 29.97 version of the film. That's the only true version, and we are not creating that version. We're creating a 24 frame version. So it is going to be different. Hopefully people won't notice because I've done a good job of putting it back together at 24 frames. But it is not going to be identical because we're doing it at a completely different frame rate. That's 6 frames shorter.
Yeah. So what's the running time difference then between the original broadcast and what we're getting here?
I think it's about 6 minutes. I mean, it's a 90-minute film, is what it is. And it was, I think, 23 or 24 minutes on BBC transmission. No, there was nothing cut out, apart from obviously the censored version had lots cut out. We've ignored that version. The only change that we've made is that we've added the dedication for John Pertwee at the end of the UK. That's the only difference that there is, which of course we've had to convert to 24 frames. So, because it's a 24 frame, the only version of the film that we've made is a 24 frame version. We have not made a 25 frame version. That's not really true. We have made a 25 frame version for the BBC archive, but we're also going to give them the 24 frame version because the 25 frame version is only really good enough for terrestrial broadcasts. For iPlayer they might want to use a 24 frame version, which they could do. So yeah, so for UK public service they will have a 25 frame version, but the version that we're releasing is the same for the US and the UK. Yeah, 24 frames.
Fantastic. So you've mentioned there going through every single frame.
Yes.
So what can you tell us about things you may have spotted with the multiple takes? Were there fluffs or chickens going mad, anything like that sort of caught your eye?
I mean, yeah, there's the thing that stands out mostly, bearing in mind it's kind of frustrating scanning film, because Rush's film, I mean, because of course there's no sound with it. So it's really hard to tell what is a fluff when you can't hear what is being said. And as I say, I'd already conformed the film and got it into a movie, and I think we were already grading it before the sound had even arrived in the UK. So I haven't really heard very much of the sound rushes, or we have transferred them all, but I've not listened to very much of them. It's an enormous project. I think it's maybe 75 terabytes in size.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a big project. I think people think, oh, it can't be that big. It's only a 90-minute movie, you know. It'll fit on a 4K disc, which is what, 100 gigabytes or something like that. But no, it's hard to say how much each roll takes, but it's a lot, you know, because you're scanning 2 versions of the film, and we're scanning it in a codec, a raw cinema codec, and we're doing it in 4K. It's not 4K that you and I know or would expect to be on a disc. We're scanning it it is 4096 pixels across the top, the width 4096, but the height is 3072, and the height of a 4K release video on the disc is 2160 pixels is the height, but we're scanning the full aspect of the frame and the height of that is 3072 pixels. So it's a big film frame, and we're doing 2 versions of that as RAW files. So it's a big project, and then on top of that, all of the audio. They're obviously much smaller files, but there's all of that. When we've backed up, we'll be archiving all of the picture and all of the sound rushes. And in fact, that's part of the deal. We're giving all of that content back to Universal. So they're keeping a copy of everything as well, all the scans. And it's a good job that they're going to keep it, because all the film is suffering from vinegar syndrome.
So pretty much got to it just in time.
Well, I mean, it's maybe got another 10 years in it, unless they freeze the film, which no one will do that. Not 200. It's 31 boxes, 219 rolls. So it's it's a large amount of film to keep. I mean, the irony is that's probably one of the reasons why it wasn't put into cold storage 30 years ago, and it's probably only been kept in ambient temperature in Los Angeles. And film is film. It's fragile, and it's susceptible to changes in temperature, and that's humidity changes, and that's one of the issues with that particular title. It's just how it was stored. And I think if you think about it, with a big company like that produces enormous amounts of content, and they keep everything just in case, it's inevitable that for things that aren't deemed to be particularly important, I don't think this would have been deemed to be as a particularly important project. It was a pilot that never went to series, was finished on digital videotape in standard definition. Who would ever want to go back to that? But anyway, here we are.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I imagine that there's so many things that there's clips emerged in YouTube over the years of green screen stuff with Paul McGann,
yes,
rotating, and you can see his boys with him in a couple of shots as well.
Yes.
Is that the sort of thing that showed up in the original film?
Yes, that's right. I mean, we scanned everything that was shot, and we had a log of everything, so we knew that we had every frame that had been filmed, and all of that material is there. I think if you're talking about outtakes, it was obvious that Eric Roberts was a bit of a joker. So at the end of one take, when you're marking using the clapperboard, you ID a take, and at the beginning you mark it and you clap it down. But sometimes you might, for all sorts of reasons, you might want to start shooting before you ident it. And so you would then, at the end of the take, you would do an end board, and you would hold the clapperboard upside down, and you would do, rather than doing that, you'd do that. And so you'd end board it, and at the end of one of the takes, I think he put his finger in the clapperboard or whatever, and pretended to have had his finger trapped in the clapperboard, and got a laugh from the other actors and the guy doing the clapperboard. So he obviously was, I think, enjoying himself on set. And there are a few occasions at the end of a lot of takes, he would kind of gurney the camera or get his face right into the lens at the end of a take, or cross his eyes or whatever. He'd do weird things. So I think he was just, I mean, actors like acting, that's the whole point. They like pretending to be other people. And I think he was just enjoying pretending to be this villain. And at the end of each take, he would just kind of come out of character and be himself for a bit,
A bit of goofing around. I think that's a good way to diffuse the tension.
A bit of goofing around. And there was one slate where Paul McGann had to run onto the TARDIS console set, and he tripped and fell, went flying. Yeah, that was an instant stop of everything, Camera stopped instantly. But he must have been okay, because he did another take. So yeah, there are things like that. But yeah, I showed Marcus Hearn at Doctor Who magazine the footage of Paul with his children. And he said, "Oh, we're doing an interview with Paul. Don't suppose you can send me those and I'll show Paul?" So I did. And of course, Paul said, "Oh, these are great." I think actually his son might have done the interview.
I think it was David Richardson, and Sonny was there as well, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, he was really pleased to have seen those, and he's very keen to have copies of them. So, but I mean, he's going to be at the BFI, so I'll just give him a disc or something with the footage on. He'll have the footage.
Yeah, I mean, that's the great thing now, that there'll be so many sort of, alternate angles and things. You've been able to get some lovely new pictures of Paul McGann in costume in a lovely super high res.
Yeah, well, actually, I have done about 100 grabs from the rushes for various, so for Doctor Who Online and for Doctor Who magazine. I've not seen what they've done yet with the magazine, but so there's a lot there, and some of those grabs are from different takes, and some are from deleted scenes, and some are of where the camera was running when it shouldn't have been, and there's lots of people on set milling about. There's some of Geoffrey Sachs you can see on set chatting to people. So various, and I've used some of those in his In Conversation that I've done. So there's various new pictures of various people from the show and cast and crew. But also Lee Binding gave me a wish list of things for the artwork of the sleeve, and in particular he was trying to find a full-length picture of Sylvester in costume, because apparently there isn't any official photographs that show him. And I think I managed to send him from the turntable sequence some grabs of Sylvester, and it's basically the shin up, which is good enough, I think. So he's used those, and then also for the steelbook he said, can you send me the grabs of the shots of Paul and Eric, where we've got the half shots of their half faces. He wanted to mirror those in the artwork, so I was able to do those.
That's amazing.
Yeah, they work really well. I mean, the other things that turned up, so in addition to and those high-res pictures are really very good. I mean, it's not super high resolution as like we can get now with stills photography, but it's still 35mm negative, which is what most publicity shots probably would have been taken on at the time. So they look pretty good. But the biggest challenge, apart from all of the other big challenges, was actually getting the old effects to not look like they were upscaled. And that included the whole of the opening title sequence and things like the morpho snake thing that the Master ends up, for no very good reason, looking like, and how we bedded all of those elements back into the original film. And so, for example, I was trying to avoid, where possible, using upscaling, unless I really needed to upscale. So, for example, there were various sequences which were shot on film, but then they were made to work as an effect on tape. So there were two or three sequences like that. The motorcycle going into the TARDIS and then coming out again, and some of the shots of the Master being sucked into the Eye of Harmony. So the motorcycle was pretty straightforward because I had all the clean elements. It was just wipes and aligning everything to the original, and then rendering that back out for the colorist. So I didn't render it as 4K. I rendered it as at scan resolution in the same color space. So the shots are as he would see them, as the colorist would see them. The motorcycle driving into the police box and driving out again. Those two sequences, as far as he's concerned, he had the original film and was grading that. So that matched in perfectly with all of the rushes. I did exactly the same with the shots of Eric being sucked into the Eye of Harmony, where it didn't have a digital effect added to it, but it had the wires removed. So he's suspended on wires, and which you can see quite clearly. So all I did was I redid the wire removal on the original film scans rather than on the SD video version of it, and then exported that out as like the other material, like the rushes. So again, the colorist has got the 4K film without the wires in, and he can just grade that exactly like all the other material around it, and that worked really well. And then for most of the snake effects, apart from one really, I upscaled, and then we used AI diffusion to add detail back to the effects elements. So the mats for the snake and the snake itself, the worm, whatever. And then they had to be aligned and created as a 4K asset in the project so that you could then add that to any shot. And then once they were aligned, we were able to put them back onto the 4K film, the scanned film. And that worked particularly well with where Chang Li's foot goes into the puddle and then it turns into a snake and heads off. Because actually when I looked at that sequence, it looked pretty dreadful in the original version. For a start, the background that the puddle was sitting on is actually a freeze frame. And the thing is, because they were editing in an interlaced video environment, a freeze frame on Digibeta is actually a field freeze, not a frame freeze. So you're only freezing half of the frame. So the resolution of that freeze frame, it's like 1960s 405 line Doctor Who. It's actually less resolution than that, and you can see the line structure in it in the background in the version that we've got, or the version that we had up until now, the 1996 version. So I wanted to go back to the film rushes to extract that clean background plate and have it as full motion film rather than a freeze frame and B, a freeze frame from an interlaced video source. So that was straightforward to do. And then the foot coming in to step into the puddle, we had a mat for that, but it wasn't a particularly good mat. And so we've used object masking to mask the foot, to separate the foot from the background, because it did walk into a genuine puddle. So we've object masked it to isolate the 2 feet walking through the shot, and that sits on top of that background plate. And then in between, we've got the 4K upscale and AI diffused puddle that turns into a snake. And then again, I gave that package to the colorist, and he could then grade all of those elements separately from each other to create that one high resolution composite in true 4K. So for most sequences, so the snake going into the sleeve in the ambulance, I think it enters the ambulance from the cockpit over the top. That's an object mask onto the film. They're going into the sleeve, they're coming out of the sleeve and then rising up. All of that is really good 4K upscales and AI diffusion upscales to true 4K and superimposed back onto the original 4K negative and graded. So those are all pretty seamless. There are 2 shots which they look okay at the moment. The first one actually is fine, and that's the shot where the snake goes into Eric Roberts' mouth in the bed. And I didn't have any of the elements to make that work exactly as it appears in the finished thing. So that is an upscale, and I can upscale SD to 4K here without as a hardware scale, which always looks better. And then it went through the AI diffusion to add more detail to that 4K upscale. That actually looks pretty good, but we're really on the limit of what we can grade. So Darren, the colorist, had a lot of difficulty getting that to look convincing. I think that shot is fine now, but the next shot, which is a close-up of Eric Roberts' eye, which kind of opens out, that shot was just falling apart. You can't push it any way. It was so crushed down, and it had a lot of, as soon as you start to lift even the SD just to get a bit more out of it for the upscale, there's just nothing there to pull out because it had been graded so dark. So that was the challenge. And again, I think we do get away with it now. I think it is a blink, and if you see an issue with it, you miss it because it's kind of gone. But those are the 2 shots in the whole film that worried me. And then other shots where, and again, this comes back to where people, when they've seen AI diffusion used before on feature films like The Abyss and in True Lies, where it's getting faces in the background wrong. And that's because the original material is low resolution. and actually there isn't really a recognisable face to enhance. There's just not enough detail there. And so there are two shots that were like that in the film, where I had to upscale the shots because I didn't have the main elements, and those were both those really big wide shots of the TARDIS console room with the kind of galactic map that appears above. And in the first shot it's the Doctor and Grace, in the second shot it's the Doctor, Grace and Chang-Li, and two different parts of the film. But it's that same wide angle. And the upscale works brilliantly on everything in the frame apart from their faces, because there's just not enough, particularly in NTSC 525, you haven't even got the advantage of the extra 100 lines of 625 to play with. So in the wide shot, you can't really recognise Paul McGann at all. It's just a blur. If you watch the DVD or the Blu-ray that's been made available previously, you still can't recognise it as actually Paul McGann. You know it's him because he's the actor that's playing the part, but you can't recognise it as him on its own, as his face. And if you can't recognise it, the AI won't be able to create a face out of it. So with both of those shots, we had to restabilise both the original version and the film, because most of the time you don't need to do that because it's pretty stable. But when you try and align the original effect shot from the original version of the film with the new scan, the film is being transferred differently and therefore it has different movement. And so both films might be just very subtly doing that, just moving up and down differently to each other. So they're not aligned to each other. So you need to stabilise those shots so that they're both rock solid. And then I took the rushes of that shot from the film scans and we rotoscoped them back in to the effect shot, and then matched the grade of that. And then also we had to then regrain the effect shot with a new film grain that matched the original film grain that affects the characters. So now we have a really convincing shot where, for the first time in that wide shot, because it's 35mm negative film, and it was quite a grainy shot, but nevertheless you can now, for the first time in quite a difficult shot, recognise all the main characters as their actors. You know that they are, it wasn't a stand-in or anybody. You can tell it's Paul, you can tell it's Daphne, and you can tell it's E.G. in those shots, where you couldn't see that before. And it's in a shot that we have used AI on, but not on them. Yeah, so I'm really pleased with those. And also Steve Broster worked on this, doing the graphics, the title graphics and the end captions. But also we had some difficulty getting the fireworks to work for the kiss at the end. So again, that was shot with a background plate on film. The effects, the firework shot is stock footage, which we didn't have the original film for. We just had their transfer, and they'd processed it. They'd done some work to it, which looks a bit weird. But I mean, I've no idea where they got the fireworks from. And then they shot a foreground plate of the kiss. So background plate clean of anything apart from the fact that it was pouring with Vancouver rain. Then on top of that, fireworks shot against a dark sky. And then on top of that, the actors kissing. And Darren tried it and couldn't get it to work. We couldn't add the fireworks back into the background and make it look convincing like it did in the original. And so I got Steve Broster on the case because he knows about that kind of stuff. So yeah, he got it to work, and then I sent that down to Darren for the final session, for the final grading session, and he was very happy with that. And then he just added the actors over the top again. We had the mats for them, but the mats, of course, are standard definition mats to key in the actors into the fireworks, and it didn't track with the new 4K scans. So we didn't even bother with mats anymore for that anyway. We just used the object masking, which is very accurate, and we were able to just separate them from the background completely just in software and put them back in over the top of the effect shot. So again, that's now in true 4K, although the fireworks that have been added back in are upscales because we only had them in standard definition. But they look very convincing, you wouldn't be able to tell.
So the titles have been remade from scratch then?
Yeah, not entirely. The logo is completely unpicked. So the logo had to be added back in for all sorts of reasons, not least that, again, we are using... Well, the first thing is I came up against the frame rate issue. So I had assumed that all of the effects work had been done at 29.97, even though some of it was sourced from film. So I assumed that they had taken the film transfers of the effect shots and transferred them at 29.97 like everything else and did the effects work at 29.97. That was not what happened. So when I tried to transfer that material, this is all the effects elements, when I tried to transfer it using my process that I'd used for the Edit Master to unpick the 3.2 pull down from the 29.97 transfers, when I got those effect shots and laid them in against the pictures, they were all running too short. They weren't long enough. That didn't make any sense to me. How is this possible? So I thought, why don't I just try transferring it at 30 frames, 29.97, and see how that works? So I did that. It still didn't work. It was still too short. So it wasn't really making any sense to me. And it was short, but in a different way, short. And then I thought, hang on a minute. If I was a graphics person, I wouldn't want to make more work for myself by having to add graphics to 30 frames. I'd want to work at 24 frames. So maybe what they've done is they've recaptured the film at 24 frames rather than at 29.97, which you can do. They've got those frames into their workstation. They've worked on them at 24 frames. And what they would do is, at the end of each day of work, they would back up what they'd done to digital videotape. Everybody does that. Graphics, you back everything up. You don't ever leave it on your system for video. They then transferred it to DigiB to videotape, which of course records at 30 frames or 29.97, and if they're working at 24. But what if you could just set your system to play those frames progressively out at 24 frames without the 3.2 pull down, as if it's 30 frame video. Therefore, it runs faster. So what that meant was that on the videotape, which is running at 30 frames per second, in each second of those 30 frames, 24 of them are discrete frames, graphics frames, of all the effects. So what that means is, all I had to do was capture it at 30 frames and then tell my system that it's not really 30 frames, it's running at 24. And as soon as I did that, it came good. What that also means, though, is that unlike the Edit Master, all of the effects material, all the effect shots, I could process those as true 24 frame sequences, rather than having to worry about unpicking the 3.2 pull down with all the errors that would introduce. So actually it was the best possible solution that they could have done to help me get the effects running at the right speed without any of the judder that you would get or have to try and unpick. So that worked brilliantly for all of the effect sequences apart from the opening titles, because the opening titles they'd produced in true 30 frames. And even, I think some of them, looking at it, might actually be at 29.97, which I had unpicked, but still hadn't got rid of the judder. And so the background, when the logo swings past the camera and reverses itself and goes down the time tunnel, there's actually the star field that's behind it has got an enormous amount of judder on it. The judder is on the original titles master, it's on the original composite master, it's on the BBC's depth conversion, it's everywhere. So some of that material, I think, should be true 24 frames. So like the time tunnel effect stuff, I think, is at true 24 frames. The logo is at 30 frames. The star field in the background is at 29.97. And I don't have it clean. It's blended in with other stuff. And also the rotate of the planet Scaro, which is quite slow, is at 30 frames as well. And that has always looked dreadful, quite juddery. And everything I did, nothing I could do with it was working. And in the end, I treated it as 30 frames. And then I just retimed it. I just changed the speed of it to get it to run at the correct speed. And having done that, I then added a function. It's another AI function within compositing software I use called optical flow. And it looks at any discrepancies in the motion or judder, and it fills it in and gives you a nice smooth. So actually the rotate of Scaro now, which has always looked awful, and also it didn't help that they covered it in really heavy film grain to try and make it more filmic, because it looked quite artificial. We've got rid of all of that. I mean, it just looks awful. In fact, we have got film grain on all of the effect shots, and it matches the film grain of the film, of the 4K film. But now, Scaro, when it appears, really looks, first of all, it looks really nice, sharp and detailed. It's got an atmosphere to it. It rotates very smoothly, as you would expect it to. And then the other thing that wasn't working was the TARDIS. So the TARDIS was the last thing to be shot on 35mm film, and they did various different passes for different stages of it approaching the camera and flying away. And they did a pass for the police box itself. They did a separate pass for the lights of the police public call box and the windows, and they did a separate pass for the flashing light. So I had to create a version of that with all of those elements comped together, but they'd also, in the final version, changed the speed. So the speed of it was all over the place as well. So I had to create a new matte, based on the old matte that matched that. They'd done a matte pass for all of it, which was a kind of a red background matte, which is, in theory, it's easy to key, but actually it wasn't very good. And in the original, and I didn't find it until much later, they'd actually remade the matte manually. So I, in effect, had to use that as the basis of the matte to key the TARDIS onto the background again. And that was all working perfectly until I then retimed it to change the speed back to how it looked in the original version. So there is actually a discrepancy in the mattes, unfortunately, if you look carefully on some of the motion of the police box as it rotates round. But short of remaking the matte for the new duration by rendering it out as a separate element, which I was reluctant to do because I didn't want to burn in any more artifacts into the motion. Short of doing that, I just thought, life's too short. It looks absolutely fine. I showed it to loads of people and no one can see this very minor matte keying issue. I can see it, but, you know.
Yeah, I think the Matt Doctor Who fans are most worried about is Matt Smith these days, so I think you'll probably get away with it.
I think so, yeah. So, yeah, and then the other thing, Steve had to recreate the letters, flying letters, all of that, which look really good. Post-Antiqua, yes, it is. And but then the other surprisingly challenging thing is the end credits, for two reasons. First of all, there's lots of logos of the different, like there's the Teamsters Union, there's the IARTC, the different divisions of IARTC, the union that looks after technicians and whatever. There was the Performers Association, there was the Directors Guild of British Columbia. All of them had logos, and in the original version, they're impossible to read because they're really fine and it's standard definition. I mean, you know, so we had to research all of those logos and get 1996 examples of them in high resolution to comp in for the end credits, because it has to look as it did. And then the only other problem, and we tried various different things for this and nothing worked, is that it looks like there's double imaging on the motion of the crawl, of the roller. And that, it's very frustrating because there is nothing we can do about it. There is actually a rule for the maximum speed to avoid that, which modern motion pictures adhere to. But in 1996, they did not adhere to that. And so we had two options. Have the roller as it is. If you freeze frame it, you don't see any judder because it's discrete, but it's just how it appears on a modern screen. I mean, I don't know how it's going to look at the BFI. Maybe it'll be smooth, who knows? But there's this very slight double imaging to it, which is, for someone who's a purist, that bugs me. So the only other way around it was to not have the roller that duration. We'd need to make it quite a bit longer, and then it wouldn't have matched the soundtrack. So we couldn't do that. So I'm afraid there is slight double imaging on the end roller. But these are all things that we know about, and we've tried to resolve. And
People now at least know why when they've heard this.
yeah, they'll know why. But yeah, I mean, other things that happened as well, and I spoke to Jeffrey Sachs about and got his okay on this. There's 2 shots that I've reframed, because the framing is exactly as it was. We haven't changed the framing because he knew exactly what he was doing. He framed his shots very carefully. So we've kept everything as it is, but there's 2 shots that we've reframed. One is the shot, scene 43, which is actually the first scene that they shot on the first day. And it's where the Doctor and Grace come into her apartment. It's one of the few daylight scenes in the film. There's only 2, I think. And there's a wide shot where she realises that the sofa's been taken, looking towards the stairs up. And at the very top of the frame, there's some matte box jutting into the shot, into the frame. And you can see it on the SD version of it. And it just looks awful. So that we've framed out, although you've actually got a little bit more at the bottom of the frame now and a little bit less at the top, but the width is pretty much the same. No, I don't think anyone, unless I'd mentioned it, no one would be able to notice that. But the one that I got advice on from Jeffrey is a shot where there's something in shot that shouldn't be in shot. I mean, actually, in the opening titles, when the camera pulls out from the Master in the cage, in the Dalek extermination chamber, as I've now discovered that's what it is, on the right-hand side of the frame, you can see a light stand.
Oh my God!
It's always been there. It's always been there. But there's a light stand in shot. If you look carefully, it's there.
I'm going to go and check this once we've finished chatting.
Well, it's in 4K now, so we've left it in. We haven't taken it out. But the other shot, in the sequence after the kiss, where there's that very fast bit of exposition from Paul McGann, where he talks about the Time Lords and Gallifrey and all of that, and she thinks he's absolutely insane, drops her coat and runs to the house. It cuts to her running to the house, then it cuts back to him, and it's quite a wide shot, but it's static. Basically, it's one shot cut in 2, and it's the end of those 2 shots that they've cut in 2. So the first shot is a track in on the 2 of them, and then the camera's pulled out on the dolly track to get this final framing of Paul, and the end of the dolly track just juts into the bottom of the frame. And it's in the programme, it's in the final version of the film. And I looked at it and I thought, I'll reframe it and see what Jeffrey thinks. And I tried reframing it, and it just doesn't really work, cutting the bottom of his feet off, because you have to go right in, and it just looks really odd. You either have to go in much further, or you stay back for the framing to work. And he'd obviously chosen that framing. So I rang him up and said, look, what do you think about this shot? And I explained, as I've explained to you, and he said, yeah, don't mess around with the framing of that, leave it as it is. And so I haven't changed anything, it's exactly as it was, with the dolly track still pointing in, and they'd obviously left it in 1996 for that same reason. So yeah, but yeah, there's a dolly track in there. I mean, there's another shot where there's a light in shot, it's an effect shot, and they've left the light in shot. And then there's one of those flash frames. You can see the top of the set and all the lights in the top of the set. That was left in. If you go through frame by frame, it's in there. So all of those we've left as they are. And yeah, so yeah, it all looks really good. And then Darren Mostyn, I mean, anyone that is a DaVinci Resolve super user or is getting into grading will know who Darren Mostyn is. He's got his own YouTube channel, and he's an expert on DaVinci Resolve, which is the project we were scanning in and the project we were conforming in. And so he's a very experienced colorist, years and years of experience, and he's got a really good facility down in Brighton. So we did the grading with him, and we did the SDR grade first, so the Blu-ray grade first, and then we did the 4K grade based on that SD. Normally you do it the other way around. You'd normally do the HDR grade first, get that looking right, and then you do a trim pass to make your SDR for the non-HDR versions, but the problem is that there was quite a lot of SDR colour space in the film that had to be converted to HDR, and particularly the beginning, you know, the opening titles. So we thought, no, let's get it looking right for the Blu-ray, and then we'll make the HDR grade from that grade. And that meant that we could get it absolutely nailed for the Blu-ray, and then it's in the ballpark for the HDR, and then when you get into the HDR grade, you can then push the HDR. So we did it that way, and that went really well. And I was a bit worried initially about, there's quite a lot of film grain in there when he was grading, but actually, as soon as he started grading it, a lot of that was getting back to where it needed to be, looking really good. So we did some test grades on the first day, and then at the end I came back. It's a 3-hour drive back to Birmingham from Brighton. 3.5 hours actually. And I finished at 6, so I was back about 9:30. And I can't wind down immediately from a 3.5 hour drive. I have to kind of clear my head completely before I can get to sleep. So I watched a film and I thought, well, what should I watch? I know I'll watch Blade Runner, which is not the same period. It's 14 years before the TV movie, but it's shot on very similar film stock, 35. I think the TV movie was 5298, and this was a very similar, an earlier, not as modern a stock, an earlier stock, but a very similar stock and shot in similar conditions, mostly on sets or at night, and watched Blade Runner, and it was a lot. I mean, it's a beautiful restoration, 4K grade, on the 4K disc of Blade Runner, and it's some shots which are so much grainier than the TV movie, a lot more. So I was very happy then. It's got a very natural, organic feel to it, which, and this is the problem that I think people might, I think it's going to be a bit of a culture shock for people to see it as it is now, because the film grain is just not visible at all in the film as it was originally made, because of it's been lost in being standard definition. It's all of that grain is very fine and detailed, and all that detail's gone. So that, in some ways, that's why it probably looked quite slick in 1996. Now it looks like a film. It looks like a feature film. It's got that granularity in the film grain, and it feels quite organic, which is really cool.
Really looking forward to seeing that.
I mean, you can see it in the trailer. You can see the film grain is very, very clear. Yeah.
Of course, I suppose it would be remiss of me not to say 2 words to you here.
Oh yeah.
Gordon Tipple.
Oh yes. Yeah. He's on the disc.
Yay!
Gordon Tipple is on the disc, yeah. He is in the alternative opening titles. Yeah, his speech was recorded, and it's Jeffrey directing him. He came in specially for one session at some point. He's on one of the roles, role 63, I think, from memory. Yeah, he's in there. We've basically created the original opening sequence before they decided that they weren't allowed to mention the Daleks. So the film actually starts off with the Scaro caption, as you see, with Gordon Tipple's voiceover, and then he's in the cage thing, and the caption comes up which says Dalek extermination chamber, offender, or something like that, the master. So it's really like drilling it home. Anyway, and I found that graphic on one of the penultimate compilation tape of the effects material, which was dated very close to the final version. So it got very close before they realised they couldn't really identify the Daleks. And then the very last thing that was recorded, which on sound, was Jeffrey Sachs doing the stand-in Dalek voice, which is the voice they ended up using, but changing. So, yeah. We haven't put it on the disc. He said he only did it as a kind of a guide, and they ended up using it. They changed the pitch and everything to make it kind of work. I don't think anyone's quite ready to hear that.
Not yet, anyway.
Not
Maybe
yet.
in the future.
Absolutely in the future, yes. But not without his permission. I think he'll want to hear it. I think he'll want to hear it first. If we ever do a making of, then it'll appear there. But yeah, so the TV movie is, I was actually quite down on the TV movie in 1996. But I thought, I loved Paul McGann as the Doctor. And also, Daphne is so good in it. I mean, really, she's so good. There's a lot of little stuff going on there that she puts into it. And also, it's easily the best directed classic, if you want to count it as classic series, it's absolutely the best directed classic series, Doctor Who. And with good reason, I mean, they had $5 million to make it, they had the time. If you were going to make a 1 hour TV drama in the UK, you'd normally do that in 10 days. You'd shoot it in 10 days. He did it in 29 days, a 90-minute feature movie to a feature film standard. And I think that's a very tight schedule for a feature film.
Especially given that they had to have it ready for broadcast within, they finished shooting early February, I think it was. So they'd have literally 3-month turnaround. So you'd have people like Patrick Lussier and all these other wonderful people hard at work to get it finished.
That's right. Well, Patrick Lussier, I mean, talked to Jeffrey and he raves about him. I mean, he's become a really good director in his own right, I mean, he was the one that was putting all of that stuff together. He made the edit very easy for Jeff. But a lot of the tapes, the audio tapes, the dates on the audio tapes are like days, like a few days before the transmission in the States. So the whole thing was very tight, very, very tight. And it's a miracle that they were able to do it, I think.
It sounds like it's been a bit of a miracle for you to get all of this done.
The aim was to finish the Conform by Christmas, because there was a possibility so we got the film in October and we started scanning it pretty much straight away, and that took 3 weeks. And then I came back and I did a week of conforming, and then I had to stop and finish some stuff off for season 21. I was a couple of weeks doing that. No, I think I did the scanning with Dave, then came back, had a week doing season 21, and then I was on it for the next month doing the conform and the effects work, because Darren, at one point he was going to be available the last week in December, but in fact I think it was the second week in January that he started grading it, and that we had to get that absolutely right, because the workflow for HDR is very different and involved, and it involves different data levels. You can have video levels or data levels, and you have to do everything at data levels. That means that if you want to guarantee that you've got the full gamut of colour space, you need to export it rather than 422. You need to export in 444, so all the colours uncompressed. You need to export with data levels so that he's got plenty to play with in the grade. And you're dealing with a different colour space for the raw files as well, which is Rec 709. So you've got to deal with that as well. And having done the conform, I also had to create 6 acts. So rather than work on one big long timeline, he could work in shorter sections, and then that's just easy to deal with when you're grading. Once he was finished, he had to then export and get that material back, and then I had to create the versions for the authoring house. So I had to get everything together and exported ready for the company that was creating the final version of the film for both HDR and SDR. So if there was any issue with one or the other, all those changes had to be made on all the different versions of the film. I think in total, in the end, there's 8 versions of the film to get it to...
Wow.
Well, it has to be, because I'll tell you why. Obviously, the film's being finished at 24 frames, but actually 24p is not a valid frame rate for Blu-ray or 4K Blu-ray. It has to be 23.98. But all the sound is at 24 and the pictures are at 24. So we had to finish everything at 24 frames. So that meant we had an SDR version of the UK and an SDR version of the US. So that's 2. And then we had an HDR at 24 frames. And then we had an HDR version of the UK and the US edit. So your 24 frame masters. Once those were signed off, Mark was mixing all his sound to those versions. They're all laid back, 24 frame sound to that, and then he creates the Dolby Atmos package, which isn't laid back against pictures, it's delivered as a separate package to the authoring house. Except, having made the 24 frame versions, they then had to make 23.98 versions for the authoring house. So the 24 frame versions are for the archive only. The 23.98 versions are made from those. Then proxies had to be sent to Mark so that he could then retime all his soundtracks, his mixes, to 23.98. And there is a difference. I think it loses a frame every 1,000 frames, whatever. And it does make a difference over the length of the film. So having done that, he then had to also create a retimed Dolby Atmos package to match the 23.98. So yeah.
It's been a lot of work, I think, it then is therefore, to sum up what we've just been saying.
It was a lot more involved, I think, than people might have expected. Just to get from... If we were doing this as a Doctor Who TV movie that was made at 25 frames, it'd be dead easy because everything would be at 25. We wouldn't have to worry about different frame rates and different timecode conventions or anything like that. I mean, the good thing is we didn't have to do standards conversions for the American disc. The American disc is still going to use a 24 frame or 23.98 masters. I mean, that's the irony, actually, of the BFI screening. It's a very unusual screening because it is a completely unique master.
A bit like Eric Roberts.
A bit like Eric Roberts, yes. Because it's 4K, but it's not HDR. It's Rec 709 SDR. It's 24 frames, which the Blu-ray is 23.98. And it's 7.1 audio, which is only ever on that version. Because everybody else is getting a Dolby Atmos. So... yeah, so the BFI screening is going to be a unique screening. So.
I'm glad that I've got my ticket, so looking forward to that immensely.
Yeah.
Well, Paul, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to chat to me in such detail and hanging on every word. So
that's right.
Cannot wait to see the fruits of your labour on the 17th and indeed forevermore on shiny disc format.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to seeing it myself on the big screen. You know, we had the trailer when we did the season 1 launch. We had the trailer, and it looked great on the screen. So I'm kind of happy now. I think it's going to be fine. I can let it go, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Paul, thank you once again.
Thank you.
Wow. Now there's an information overload there because that's information to make your brain bleed if you don't understand these things. But the detail, I mean, the fact that it took 2.5 years of negotiations to get things, and thankfully somebody from the BBC had an in at Universal to get access to the original material. Incredible.
I feel like Katerina when she's asked to get the chair. What is chair?
Yeah, I know what you mean, but it's incredible just the dedication that everyone puts in because they love the Stafford TV show and going. I mean, I'd imagine that the hours Paul's put in are way above what he's been paid to do.
Oh God, yeah. The debt that all Doctor Who fans own to the restoration team and friends is huge, just immense.
Yeah,
and they don't get enough credit a lot of the time.
I would absolutely agree. And of course, Matt, if you want some more detail on these restorations, do you know what you can do?
You could go to maybe a website or Facebook group.
You could do, but alternatively, you could also come back next week because we're going to be speaking with two people who've actually been involved with the physical restoration of this incredible film. Because we're going to be speaking with David Palfreyman, who has done the film restoration, and the one and only Mark Ayres, who's going to tell us about his work on the sound. And my goodness, these two know their stuff, they love it, and just like Paul, so much detail. It could make your brain explode, not just bleed, but explode.
There is a lot of detail, but it is about how they make our favourite show look great, sound great, and it's been said many times before, so it's a cliche, but it's absolutely true. It mostly looks better and sounds better than it did when it was first broadcast.
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't it be lovely if the next time there's a Doctor Who night or something on the BBC, this is the one they go to and they can broadcast this, and that in some ways gets Paul and the rest of the team some sort of mainstream credit, not just from us dedicated fans.
Yeah, definitely. They should be on stage at the RSC.
Yes, been converted into American colour. So they lose 100 lines off themselves. Yeah, that would be great.
The colour slightly bleeding out of them, sort of floating around like a halo.
Yeah, and the movement's slightly more blurred. So
Yeah. All of the lights leave a kind of little trail.
yeah, that's the reward, to be punished.
You look like the unrestored Curse of Peladon. One for the old fans.
Yeah, very much so.
Is it Agador or is it just the torch flaring?
Yeah, as that tape clogs up the heads again and they need to clean it and start again. I think that tape actually sits in Paul Vanezis' house, and I'm sure he was using it as a doorstop or something like that, if I recall. Something on the Restoration Team website from many moons ago.
That tape is one of my, not just earliest Doctor Who memories, one of my earliest memories ever. So
wow.
Because they repeated it in 1982.
Mm-hmm.
Doctor Who and the Monsters. And I got sent to bed within a minute of it starting.
No, I was going to Beavers in those days, and I was able to go Monday to Wednesday, and then I always missed episode 4 because Beavers was on a Thursday, and yeah, I was really into the Beavers then, so it was good. It was good. Learned a lot of things in my youth, so that have come in handy in later life.
Excellent. It sounds very worthy.
It was. I was, of course, in the scouting movement for many years. I never did scouts, but I did Venture Scouts and Cubs.
Okay. Yeah. So I like Cubs.
There we go. Let's do my Cub salute there and the likes. So, if you've enjoyed today's episode, feel free to pop onto your podcast provider of choice and leave us a review if you'd like to. It'd be very kind. It'd be nice, sort of. If you've enjoyed what we've done, then we can benefit, because then more people will benefit, and algorithms and technical stuff like that. I like techno, but I don't know about internet techno. And you can follow us on social media at Pieces of Eighth Pod on Twitter, at Finished Zine on Blue Sky, and pop by our Facebook group as well and share your favourite bits of which bits you'd like to see most in upscaled quality or something. That kind of stuff. We like to hear these bits, so there we go. So Matt, thank you very much.
And Kenny, would you be able at all to power up the crystals?
Yes, I will. Oh, I love this bit. Right, let's reach across this piece of the console, and here we go. Bye-bye, Duggins.
Bye.